So welcome everybody. We will begin shortly. If you have any questions and answers, please just put them in the box, provide the question answer box. We won't be looking for raised hands, so if you have any questions, please put them there. And yeah, then we'll go. Hopefully. Okay. All right, welcome. So we're going to talk about conservation of South Africa's largest crane, and I'm the coordinator of the Drakensberg project, and I'm going to be speaking. And Tanya Smith, who you can see in the video, is the regional Southern African regional manager, and she's going to be answering the questions for us. Hi. Thanks.
Hey, Laura. Hey, everybody.
Cool. Okay, let's begin. I'm going to give an overview of the conservation of wattled cranes. I did this for my PhD, so I'm a little bit passionate about it. And as Tanya pointed out, this is quite long, so I'm going to go quite quickly. But I hope you find it interesting and there's new information for you. So, wattled crane is the largest crane in South Africa and in Africa. It has wattles, as you can see. When those wattles are short, then the wattle crane is a little bit scared, or when they're elongated, then they're quite excited. Now, wattle cranes in South Africa are critically endangered, and the biggest number count on the aerial surveys was 359 individuals. Wattle cranes, though, globally are vulnerable, with less than 8,000 that can be found around the globe. South Africa and Ethiopia are the sites with critically endangered, and the behaviour of the wattle cranes there are slightly different to those in the sub-Saharan countries. 50% of the wattle crane population can be found in Zambia. Okay, so wattle cranes in South Africa and Ethiopia, they tend to breed and keep a territory on ponds, and they maintain the territory on those ponds throughout the year, whereas in the Central African countries, they actually move throughout the year as seasonal floods. Now, the South African population, because 50% of the population is breeding, the other 50% are called non-breeding birds, and these are called the floater flock. So you'll hear me refer to the floater flock. And so they have quite different lifestyles to each other. So you'll get the pairs that are breeding on the nest, and this is a lovely camera trap photo from my PhD. And then we have the rooster, the floater flock, and I'm just going to play this video because I love it, and I think you will too. This is a roosting site. It's targeted Conserving, and it's and the high direction You've never seen the number of wattle Okay, so what is the breeding season for wattle cranes? So their annual cycle looks something like this. Winter breeding is April to August, where they lay 1 to 2 eggs. And then the chicks are reared with the parents for approximately 7 months, which is quite a long time. The chicks tend to start learning to fly between 8 and 12 weeks. And they learn from their parents how to behave and what to do. After 7 months, then the chick after 7 months, the chick will fly with its parents to one of the floater flocks in the vicinity, where the parents will leave the floater flock, leave the chick with the floater flock or the juvenile, and when the bird is old enough and finds a mate, then they will leave the floater flock. This happens generally around 4 to 6 years, but it has been known to happen as long as 2 years for breeding. Wattle cranes live for quite a long time, around 40 years in the wild, but the oldest bird in captivity is 86 years. Okay, so this is a typical wattle crane nest, and things to notice here is this pristine grassland, this beautiful wetland that the nest is in, and this mound, and that's very typical of wattle crane nesting. And if you've never heard a wattle crane chick talk to its parents, I hope you can hear this. And that bond with the parents happens within the egg. It starts to happen in the egg and then goes on, obviously, as the chick remains with the parents. Okay, so although wattle cranes are precocial when they come out, which means their eyes are open and they can walk around and they can thermoregulate, they cannot be alone. And as you can see here, they use, in this bottom photo, they use the parents for heat. And the photo above that shows the parents feeding the chick. And this continues till the chick can pick up food for itself, usually around 21 to 28 days. And it just practices between that period. Obviously, then the parents go on to teach the chick how to forage in the vicinity. And you can see at this nest site, which was taken just last week, that the chick is swimming to the nest sites at the bottom. So the little brown blob, hopefully you can see the chick is there. And the parents are just taking it to the safety of the nest site. So the birds can swim from straight off the nest, and they continue, and that water is a protection against predation. You can also see that they're very brown, so they can be hidden in the wetlands. And again, it shows you the importance of the wetlands for this species. Wattle cranes are heavily dependent on the wetlands for breeding success, without which they would not survive. I'm going to show you this video again because you may have seen it in the last presentation I did, but it's a great video. And it just shows you how much wattle crane chicks learn by mimicry. That is, they learn and feed from their parents even till they're quite large. So they're very dependent on their parents while they're learning how to be in the environment, where to learn, where to drink, where's safe. And this is really important. At 7 months, when they leave their parents, then they learn also from the floater flock where to go at different times of the years. So they're very dependent. This guy's trying to fly. He's very cute. Okay. So what are the threats to these beautiful animals? And I have a little wattle crane call for you, because that's an alarm call and it's a threat. And so the habitat loss is one of the key areas. As I've just been explaining, hydrology is really important to the wattle cranes. But not only do they need to have the quantity of water, they also need to have the quality of water. A good healthy wetland is where a wattle crane will breed, and if it's not healthy or if it's polluted, that will not happen. So they can tell us where the good sites are. They also like pristine grasslands to forage in with good biodiversity. And so some of the issues around that is changes in water levels, invasive species in wetlands and along grasslands, which can be quite expensive to maintain in management. Mining has been a problem up in Mpumalanga. Other unsustainable exploitation of wetlands, if overgrazing in certain areas could cause problems. Land management practices, obviously fire is necessary in farming practices, but if it's not timed correctly, it can interfere with breeding of wattle cranes. Human disturbance can be a factor, and there is the occasional power line collision. Okay, so I used this last time. So for a quick overview, to conserve wattle cranes, we're very much looking at a landscape value. So obviously they breed in the wetlands and they forage within the grasslands and on farmlands, but there's a number of factors that make up the landscape they live in. One of the factors as well that I haven't previously mentioned is the birds, the safe flyways. So as they move between landscapes for foraging or for roosting, it's also important that they have safe passage there. So good habitat and breeding grounds, good water quality, and also roost sites. So those floater flocks are commonly found in large groups at roost sites, and as you saw in the video. And so it's important that we start to understand more about those roost sites. Okay, so to start with conservation, first we need to know where they are, how they're using the landscape, and the way we do this is doing aerial surveys, using ringing data, and more recently we've started doing tracking. Okay, so a number of you probably have heard of the aerial survey. We've done 27 aerial surveys for wattle cranes, and with the 28th one would be this year. We can see a steady increase in the population over the last 9-10 years, but it does fluctuate in relation to if birds move during the aerial survey. The aerial survey does take 5 days, so obviously birds don't stand still in that time. However, we can see from the nest sites that there is definitely, since 2000, where 46 nest sites occurred, there's 81 on the aerial survey last year. So we are starting to see new nest sites that were not previously utilised. Other work that we've been doing over the long term is ringing. We've been ringing since the 1980s, with over 178 rings being put on since then. And over those 31 years from the analysis I did for the PhD, we can see a number of factors that can tell us about the wattle crane population. So here we tend to put rings on. It doesn't disturb the chicks. We catch them before flight. Because they tend to go to ground, it's easy to just go and find them, pick them up, put the rings on, let them go, and they go back to their parents. So the ringing data that we've collected over the last 31 years does give us an indication of how far these birds are flying, and they're very dependent to the Drakensberg area, the Midlands area, where there's dense breeding population. But we can see that historically there was other movement from other areas like Mpumalanga and Free State. However, the populations there have declined to almost nothing, and so the core of the population is within the Drakensberg. Some of the information, so of the 178 individuals that have been rung, 43% have been recited, which is a very high figure, probably because of the high intense monitoring that we do, but also because it's a small population. The survival data that we received from this suggests that in the Midlands, survival after from 8 to 12 weeks into adulthood is about 83%, which is pretty good. However, survival on the nest is much lower due to the risks. Okay, so more recently we've been doing some transmitter work. So we've been using GSM microwave telemetry, and we've managed to be able to track 5 wild chicks in collaboration with a number of other organisations, and we're starting to track adults. This was the first capture of an adult. It's much more difficult capturing adults. However, we were successful on one occasion. The sort of data that we get from this sort of work, we can see, I hope you can see the little red mark on your videos, on your screens. And so you can see this bird was a chick that was run in Underberg, and you can see the flight path that it takes. You can see the time it spends in areas. So there's definitely a strong regional movement, which is very clearly defined here. When we monitored the adults, we saw the same movement, and we can see on the map here that there's a high focus of movement within the Midlands area around Nottingham Road. And then the bird also uses this area in seedable. This information is really important for helping us decide where key areas that we would work would be. All the data from all the chicks tended to show, and from the adults showed us the same pattern of movement between certain areas. And so this is vital for focused conservation efforts. Of course, there's always one that has to be different, and you can see here in the purple, one chick decided to fly to Free State, and where the tracker stopped working. So there is definitely some cross-provincial crossing, not only into the Eastern Cape, but also into the Free State. Okay, so conservation action. So we've been conserving wattle cranes since 2000 and before. And a lot of that work has been around land protection and land management. And the other work that we've been doing more of is celebrating, obviously, the successes, education awareness, and capacity building. So I'm just going to go a little into some of these overall actions. So cranes are really dependent on farms and private landowners. There's not many areas that protect breeding sites of cranes. And as I've been showing you, that there's not a huge amount other than the tracking data showing us where the floater flock goes. So there's still a lot of work to do there. But the work we've been doing, which is on the farms and landowners, because the Drakensberg is primarily cattle, dairy, and other crops such as maize, these are really great areas for the wattle cranes. And so working alongside farmers and private landowners, we can support them in managing the land, not only for their own farms, but for also giving them advice. We can give advice on the cranes and what their needs are. And including in that and working in that is foraging areas. And this is a picture of Cedarville that I showed you on the map just earlier. And you can see that this is a natural, beautiful wetland. It's on working farmland. It's currently in a protected environment. And it's really important for roosting area and foraging area during that regional migration. And so working with farmers and private landowners, we've been able to learn a lot more about the cranes and to share our knowledge of cranes with the farmers. So they really are the heroes of the wattle crane story. We've been supporting helping with biodiversity stewardships, which is a process which protects certain lands and areas. And it's entirely voluntary. So any farmer or landowner that commits into this, is really the heroes of the wattle cranes. And so they can choose from different levels of protection for the land. And we just support that process and try to support extension services such as removing alien invasives, which, as I said, is quite a high maintenance management practice. Other work that we do is having crane custodians, where farmers are really go out of the way to support crane nest sites and that sort of management strategy to work around cranes. We like to honour those people that do that work. And this is the sort of crane custodian sign you might see around the countryside. So if you see this, you know you've got a farmer who is working alongside the conservation NGOs and bodies. Oh. And here you see Cedarville when it's announced as a protected environment. So this has sort of been really key in developing and seeing that growth of the wattle crane population. And here's some alien invasives from one of the farms I work with. And it just really is quite an intense work. So other work that we do to help support wattle cranes is education awareness. And this is a lot of collaboration with other organizations, sharing skill sets, developing toolkits such as the ecological goods and services, which is based around trying to understand if the quality of biodiversity is declining, if water quality is good. But also we work around educating children, building capacity of people, and also developing techniques around monitoring and evaluation. So this is one of the workshops we held last year, and this was teaching ecological goods and services to KwaZulu-Natal wildlife, Green Scorpions, KZN Foundation, some honorary officers as well. just teaching about the toolkit, how the ecosystem works and how it might be changing so that we can record changes to the ecosystem before negative factors affect the ecosystem. I mentioned before, I'm just going to share this video. This is Undu, one of our seasonal education workers, and he just loves doing the kids' work, and I just want to share a bit of this video.
And I handsome, I spin, I spin, I spin, I flip my wings and I jump very high. Now this, alright, between that, Ugamina, and I handsome, Ugamina, and I handsome, I spin, I spin, I spin, I flip my wings and I jump very high.
Okay, and that's just great because obviously the children are our future. And because the Wattle cranes live not only across farming land, but across communities, communal lands, and also land users in different aspects, also need to understand the importance of wattle cranes and what they tell us and teach us about the landscape. So some of the work that our community officer does, Tabor, he's been developing the Unquachini community hiking group and environmental solutions group and supporting that group. And this is the sort of event that he holds where youth from the area, which is near Underberg, go out and experience the fresh water, experience the landscape and the beauty of it. And this experiential learning is vital for the future to bring understanding to places that a lot of the youth haven't actually traveled to previously. And so this group is the first community hiking group that has been developed in South Africa. Other work that we help with, poverty is a huge factor within the landscape, within rural communities. So developing eco-industries and developing a value, a economic value to some of these rural communities who really live on the poverty line is also really important. We've been supporting ecotourism development using trails and running and mountain biking events to help support and attract tourists to the area. But also one of the biggest cues that we've been supporting is beekeeping. There's a huge uptake for beekeeping, not only for the value of honey for the human body, but also for the income and generation that it can bring to the localized area. Okay. Within all the work that we do, we try and work alongside communities, partner with the communities, and really develop an understanding. And that is really vital, whether it's commercial farmer or whether it's a communal farmer, or whether it's NGOs and partners that we work with. We just really need to understand each other's perspectives and each other's needs and each other's assets. And this is primarily what Wattle Crane conservation is all about. So what's next? Well, like I keep saying, we're just trying to understand the floater flock better. We need to get to grips with the key foraging areas, key crops that they're foraging on, key roost site areas. I'm keen to involve more citizen science in monitoring. So if you're keen to be involved, please email me. And then also we're just developing a crane custodian for communities, something that speaks more to the communities than the previous crane custodian program. And that's what I'm busy with at the moment. And thank you for listening. I want to thank the photographers, which is Daniel Doppia, Siming May and Jackie, who have all contributed photos to us for free, which is great. And over to you, Tanya.
Great, thanks, Lara. Thanks for a lovely presentation. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I think, Lara, you gave a fabulous overview of a lot of our work and our efforts to conserve not only South Africa's largest crane, but our rarest crane out of our three species that we have in South Africa. So guys, please, we have a few minutes if you would like to post any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. We do have a couple of questions that we can kick off with. So if you guys think of anything further, please add to that. And then once we obviously dealt with the questions, we will close off the presentation from there. So to kick off, we have a question from Dieter where he's asked what is the best place or places in KZN for bird watchers to see and photograph wattle cranes. So at the moment, the Karkloof Conservancy is probably the best place to see all three of South Africa's crane species, but in particular, that video that Lara showed of the wattle cranes coming in by their numbers into their roost site is currently taking place in the Karkloof. So it is located in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands area. And for those of you who are not 100% sure where the Karkloof is, it's about a 20-minute drive from the town of Howick, which is just off the N3 freeway. And they have two world-class hides that are open to the public, where you're able to visit and hopefully see cranes and photograph them. At the moment, they do have a booking system. So if you visit the Karkloof Conservancy on Facebook, if you just search Karkloof Conservancy, I have put the Facebook link in the typed answer as well in the Q&A. You will be able to book a spot in the hide for particularly over the roost time. So looking at from 3:30 in the afternoon till it's dark is generally the best time to see the wattle cranes and other crane species coming into roost. But there are also chances of seeing cranes through the course of the day at those hides. The other areas to travel through the KZN Midlands where you're almost certain to see cranes, at least from public roads, would be the Nottingham Road area, particularly on the Nottingham Road through to Fort Nottingham area. Along that road area, you generally will see cranes along that road. In addition to those areas, the Hlatakulu, Camberg, Giants Castle areas, you almost guaranteed to see cranes from public roads as well. Obviously understanding that most cranes occur on private or communal land. So just be aware of obviously seeking landowner permission before deviating from any public roads to be able to photograph cranes. But if you'd like any further information and you're keen to visit the area and find cranes, please feel free to drop us an email on crane@ewt.org.za and we'll be able to direct you to seeing cranes. And maybe if we are able to is escort you guys out into the field as well to see cranes. So we have another question from Gary Boyle, similar question to Dieter's, but asking where can you see wattle cranes in the Free State province? So essentially there are very few wattle cranes in the Free State province, so you have to work quite a lot harder to see them, but probably a fairly sure bet to see wattle cranes, I would suggest focusing around the Meermal area, that northeastern Free State. And particularly there is a breeding pair at Sekoflei Nature Reserve, which is a nature reserve managed by the Free State Department of Environment and Conservation. So that's where I would suggest visiting for the Free State area. So we have another question around from Eleanor. Are there any wattle cranes in Angula Nature Reserve? Yes, there are. So for those of you who do not know Angula, it's a Eskom-owned nature reserve and essentially is home to one of our largest hydroelectric power schemes. And the nature reserve is made up of about 8,000 hectares of pretty beautiful high altitude grasslands and some wonderful, wonderful wetlands. There are 2 breeding pairs of wattle cranes on Angula Nature Reserve. And it is also home to the critically endangered and ever-elusive white-winged flufftail. So for those of you who are keen to visit, definitely worth a visit to Angula. A really lovely example of our high-altitude Eastern Escarpment grasslands and wetlands in that area. So next question we have from Caroline: what is the success rate of removing the second egg and hand rearing the chick? Or is this no longer done? So Caroline, yeah, this is a great question, and Lara obviously touched on it through the video of showing the costume rearing of a wattle crane chick and how mimicking and learning from costume parents is really important. So we currently have about we have an insurance, what's deemed a genetic insurance captive flock of about 40, a little over 40 wattle cranes in captivity that are essentially a insurance to major catastrophe or major loss of wattle cranes in the wild in South Africa. We have had some preliminary genetic studies done looking at our wattle crane population in South Africa, as well as the wattle cranes in the large floodplains of Zambia and Botswana. And the preliminary results are showing that there is some significant genetic difference between the populations. Although not enough to warrant a subspecies, there is definitely enough to warrant special attention to South Africa's wattle cranes, and similarly with Ethiopia, paying some very special attention, conservation attention to their wattle cranes in Ethiopia. These are incredibly isolated populations from the stronghold of the population in sort of southern and central Africa. So we have worked over a number of years with various partners, including Ezimbelo KZN Wildlife, the KZN Crane Foundation, Johannesburg Zoo, to build up this captive flock as a genetic insurance that plays a major role in terms of the contribution of the conservation of wattle cranes. And that flock has been built up through second egg collections. In addition, we have also reared, with a partnership with KZN Crane Foundation and the University of KwaZulu-Natal and Ezimbelo KZN Wildlife, we've also harvested eggs from the wild and raised those chicks for release. 2 wattle cranes that were reared through this process were very successfully released and have done incredibly well in integrating with wild wattle cranes and showing the normal movements, those regional movements that Lara demonstrated with the tracking map earlier. So it proves incredibly successful. We have a very high hatching success of those second eggs that are harvested, and a very high survival rate of those chicks reared. Lara actually kicked off her crane career raising these wattle crane chicks at Johannesburg Zoo a number of years ago. So we have a very well experienced team that handles that. We, however, did not collect any eggs last year, and we will not be collecting eggs this year, just because there is no need to at the moment. We have a full captive flock with pairing taking place of those birds, and eggs being produced from the captive flock for any future rearing and releasing into the wild. For those of you who are not 100% sure to why we are able, or why we do collect or did collect second eggs, essentially wattle cranes, similarly to some other species like ground hornbills and bearded vultures, may lay 2 eggs, but they don't raise 2 chicks. They don't actually hatch the second chick from the egg. So once the first egg hatches, the pair turn their attention to the hatched chick, the recently hatched chick, and stop incubating the second egg. And unfortunately, then the chick within the second egg does not hatch, doesn't receive the last few days of incubation it requires to hatch. So it does that behavior allows us, with permission from Ezimbelo KZN Wildlife, to be able to harvest some of those eggs for rearing, for release, and supplementation of the wild birds. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I just need to give a bit of context and background. Hope you guys don't mind on that. So we have another question here from Ken Robertson, saying, years ago in KZN, I was shown 2 very tall juveniles, possibly hybrids, with a blue crane and a wattle crane. Does this happen sometimes? Yes, Ken, it does happen, and unfortunately does tend to happen a little bit more frequently where the population densities of wattle cranes are a lot lower, particularly in Mpumalanga, the Free State, and some parts of Eastern Cape, where the numbers of wattle cranes are really low, where we only have a handful of breeding pairs, and generally the breeding pairs will take the juvenile to a flock of blue cranes, which is kind of acting as a surrogate floater flocks that we see in the KZN Midlands area and the Southern Drakensberg area of KZN. So that does create an opportunity for wattle cranes to pair with blue cranes. They are fairly closely related, so they are able to actually breed and develop, I suppose, fertile eggs and raise hybrid chicks. But this is not as common as we would think that it could happen in those provinces. So Generally speaking, the chicks tend to look like blue cranes, but are really big blue cranes. Obviously, the size of the wattle crane is what makes them look a lot larger. So yeah, it is an interesting phenomenon that we do witness in South Africa, but we do not witness in obviously any of the other countries. We have another question here from Jane. It says, we have a farm in the Camberg. How will we get who assessed if we have suitable nesting sites on the farm? Jane, that would be really awesome to touch base with you after this presentation. The Camberg Valley is an incredibly important area for cranes and historically had quite a number of wattle crane breeding pairs. And we would obviously love to see those numbers increasing in the Camberg Valley. So please feel free to drop us an email after this presentation, and Lara can make a plan to get out into the field and get out onto the property and have a chat with you and have a look at determining whether there's any suitable habitat. And if there's any kind of management tweaks we can look to make on the property that makes it a little bit more attractive to wattle cranes in the future. As Lara mentioned in the presentation, we're seeing a steady increase in the number of breeding pairs and new breeding sites in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Midlands and in the Southern Drakensberg area. So the more sites that are available to wattle cranes, the better. And without doubt, the cranes will find it if it's suitable. So particularly in the Camberg, where there are lots of cranes around, which is really cool. We have another question from Robin Phipps asking, are there wattle cranes in Wakkerstroom? There are some wattle cranes around the Wakkerstroom area. They're not in Wakkerstroom itself or on that large wetland that is synonymous with the Wakkerstroom town, but there are a handful of wattle cranes within fairly close drive from Wakkerstroom. So we could potentially share that information with you outside of this presentation as well. Cool, so we have another question from Gary. It says, have wattle cranes been seen in the Devon area in Gauteng recently? Saw one there a few years back. Yes, Gary, there are wattle cranes seen in the Devon area. Generally, it's a handful of birds that are seen with a large flock of blue cranes that overwinter in that Devon area. So it's also a nice, easy drive from Gauteng, and you pretty certain to be able to see wattles and blue cranes together in a flock in that Devon area. As the EWT, we've been really proud as well with our work with the Gauteng Stewardship Department, and have secured several thousand hectares of land in that Devon area as a protected environment. And some of those properties support cranes as well. So really exciting achievements taking place in Gauteng in efforts to conserve some of these critical habitats that cranes depend on. Cool. We have another question here from Iris. Do we have cranes in Welgevonden Game Reserve in the Waterberg area? So we don't have wattle cranes in the Waterberg area, but there are blue cranes. We do have some partners and colleagues that are doing a huge amount of work with conserving the blue cranes in the Waterberg area, including a colour ringing program of bringing some of the blue crane chicks in those areas, as well as some really great resightings of colour ringed blue cranes in and around that area. So unfortunately no wattle cranes yet, but who knows, maybe in the future. But it is a sight to see our national bird, the blue cranes, which is really great. Great, guys. So I think I have captured and answered all of the questions that have been posed to us. I think while we're just finishing off, if anyone has some last minute questions, feel free to type in there. We do have a minute or two. But I want to just take, obviously, this opportunity just to thank everybody for joining us today. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Lara's been working with wattle cranes for over a decade. And you can really tell that she's super passionate about the species. I've been very privileged to work with the species as well for over a decade. And you learn something new every single day when you get to work with them. You appreciate their size, their grace, and their rarity as well in the landscape. So I really hope all of you, if you have not experienced wattle cranes in the wild, get to in the future. It's really worth the experience. They are a stunning species. And yeah, please feel free to join up to the EWT, become a member, get active, share the stories and stuff you see on our platforms. every little bit helps, and in these trying times, I think supporting each other is super important. So I think just to end off, those of you who joined us today, please feel free to sign up for our the last wild chat of this week, which will be given by Jean Tarrant, on basically bringing home the green Oscars for amphibian conservation and frog conservation. So that will be at the same time that we had this presentation on Thursday. So monitor the EWT Facebook pages and Instagram to sign up for that webinar on Thursday. And yeah, so that's it from Lara and myself. Thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a good afternoon.